It's UofL Today on 93.9 The Ville. Here's your host, Mark Hebert.
And welcome, Cards fans, to UofL Today with Mark Hebert, the show that's about all things UofL, except for mostly athletics. So we've got an interesting show, I hope, for you today, and I hope you'll stick around for the next 30 minutes and learn a little something about North Korea, because that is what's coming up here in a few minutes, a topic I'm very interested in. What's going on in North Korea? Are we headed for war with them? What is it really like under the North Korean dictator, and what is the dilemma for the rest of the countries in that part of the world? Jason Abbott directs the UofL Center for Asian Democracy, and will be here to talk about the problem that we call North Korea. But first, by any ranking, the Kent School of Social Work is one of the best programs in the country, with the graduate programs consistently ranking in the top 10 nationally. David Jenkins is the relatively new dean of the Kent School of Social Work at UofL. He's here to chat with us about himself and what's going on in the field of social work and what's going on at the Kent School of Social Work at the University of Louisville. David, good to see you.
Nice to see you.
So how long you been at UofL? It ain't been very long, has it?
It has not been very long. I started officially August 1st.
August 1st, so...
And then my contract was signed several months later.
Yeah, well,
so,
that's a whole nother story
yeah.
about why that happened. But we're glad you're here. So you got settled in Louisville, I guess.
Yeah, I think so.
How you liking it?
I like Louisville. It's a good town so far.
Okay. Where are you from originally?
I grew up in Louisiana, but my last 25 years were at TCU in Fort Worth.
Okay.
Texas.
So if you grew up in Louisiana, you would pronounce my last name Hebert.
I
would
thought
be Mark
you,
Hebert, right?
I thought you might have been a Cajun, but I might have grown up with, because
No?
yes, I grew up with Heberts.
Oh, okay. No, that would not be me. I'm a Hebert from upstate New York.
Oh, okay.
So there you go. All right, we'll talk a little bit about your background. You went to LSU. You've been to Texas. Talk just a little bit about your background, because it's an interesting way that you got to social work.
Yeah, so I grew up in Baton Rouge, went to LSU, thought I'd be a medical doctor. Just sort of had that in my brain. My parents told me I was smart, be a doctor,
Okay.
Take care of us as we get older. And then I started
my parents
college.
told me that too. It didn't
Yeah.
work out quite that way.
So I started college and got into some of the chemistries and things like that. And I was like, no, this is not what I like. And so, and even the advisors in college when I first started said, "You sure you want to be a doctor? Your scores don't line up in that direction." I was like, yeah, you don't know what you're talking about. So dropped out of med school, of going in pre-med,
Right.
and said, well, what do? I have no idea. And I jokingly say I did what every other guy did in the 80s. I did a business undergrad, or what many guys did.
Right.
And so
That was at LSU, right?
yeah, finished at LSU in business. Took a job with my dad running his business, and thought I would just sort of stay in that arena. He had a couple of businesses. I figured I would just sort of grow that kind of thing, and then he sold it. And so I was like, oh, okay, let's see, what are we going to do now?
Job.
Yeah, I got to figure out what I'm going to do. So I had some career testing, and they said, look at a bunch of things, and one of them was social work, and I truly had no idea what that was, no clue. And found out there were some social workers that went to my church, went and interviewed them, talked to them what they did, and I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. So looked into what it would take to either go get an MBA or go get a master's in social work, and I missed the cutoff for an MBA by about a week. And so I said,
Well,
well,
that made
that
your
settles
decision
it.
pretty
Yeah,
easy. Okay.
that settles it. I'll be a social worker. So did it and went into the master's program, and just didn't feel like I learned enough. I said I need to go on, get a doctorate. Went to Florida State, got my doctorate. At the time, LSU didn't have a doctorate in social work. And went into kind of family therapy as my specialty area while I was at Florida State, and was really attracted to the social work. This huge umbrella profession, lots of different things under that umbrella, and one of them is sort of the counseling field, which attracts a lot of students and stuff. But I was very interested in sort of the couples counseling, marriage, family counseling thing, and Florida State had a specialization in that at the time, and so I did a bunch of training in a clinic, worked in the marriage and family therapy clinic at Florida State. And really didn't have my eyes set on being a academic. I thought I was going to go back to Louisiana, have a practice, and they started me teaching while I was at Florida State, and I was like, oh, look at this, whole another world I had never even thought about. So started teaching and thought, well, maybe I'll be a professor and do a clinical practice. And so that's what I started doing when I moved back to when I took my first job in Texas at TCU. Was there for 25 years and took a job teaching, starting as assistant professor,
Right.
and sort of the rest,
So
is,
the rest
history.
is history.
Yeah,
So you came from TCU,
I did 25 years there.
Texas Christian. All right.
Yeah.
So who do you root for when we play Florida State in football and basketball? You can be
Well,
honest.
no,
It's okay.
you mean we U of L
Oh,
play?
yeah, we U of L, yeah.
I'm a Cards fan.
Okay,
I think that's the right answer, right?
That's the right answer. They're writing the paycheck for you. So I
when
guess
when
that's the right
LSU
answer.
played the Cards in the bowl game, I figured I couldn't be a loser either way, and so
Yeah.
I wore a purple shirt with my U of L jacket.
That's
over.
really
So-
ugly. Purple and red.
Well, I zipped it up.
Okay.
Or when Louisville was losing, I took off the jacket
there you go. Yeah,
and just had the
yeah,
LSU
of course
shirt
you
on. Sorry about that.
All right. We're talking with David Jenkins, who's the Dean of the Kent School of Social Work at the University of Louisville. When you're asked by people, what is social work, you kind of described it a minute ago. It's kind of an umbrella field. But what do you tell them? How do you describe social work?
Probably the easiest way to define it is one of the helping professions. We kind of are one of those professions that sort of bridge people and services. We hook them up with, like a medical doctor, does things, a teacher does things, a pastor does things. We're sort of one of those professions that bridges people to services. So if you're homeless, if you're got family troubles, if you're, victim of domestic violence, if you're, struggling financially, we are there to sort of bridge and connect people with services to help them have a more productive life.
And what have you found at the University of Louisville in terms of, you call them, I think, and I've called them before, points of pride, things that make the University of Louisville perhaps unique or a good social work program?
U of L has a great social work program. It wasn't my doing in the 9 months I've been here. They have a couple of what I would call points of pride, and one is our social oncology concentration. I think you may have interviewed Karen Kaiser.
I have.
And
Going to
we-
have her back on the program here in a few weeks. I
Oh,
think.
good. She is doing some really incredible work, and that is sort of making sure we're attending to the non-medical points of illness and disease and how people are impacted by my spouse, my parent having cancer, and really those struggles that people go through. So that social oncology specialization is something unique no one else has in the country. Our couples and family therapy concentration, one of the reasons I was attracted to come here, is unique. We're the only school of social work that has that embedded in there. We have a bunch of specializations that really will attract people like the couples and family therapy, school social work, mental health. There's a bunch of options for students. And so, those are sort of things that points of pride that attract students. But one of our biggest points of pride is sort of the productivity of the faculty. They're really doing some incredible research in the community, making a difference.
And on a per faculty member basis, aren't you guys bragging that per faculty member you get more research dollars than any other department in the university?
That is correct. That is what I'm told by my associate dean
So
of
you're gonna-
research.
you're gonna run with it, aren't
I'm
you?
going to keep that as one of my taglines. We're one of the most productive units.
We're talking with David Jenkins, who's the Dean of the Kent School of Social Work at the University of Louisville. You mentioned what you thought social work was and how it's perceived by the public, but those of us on the outside looking in look at that as just a really difficult, low-paying, stressful job when we hear about the social workers that work for the state and deal with child abuse cases and families that are breaking up and those kinds of things. So why does anybody go into social work?
That's a fair question. I think any of us go into the helping professions because we want to make a difference. We see a concern, we see an issue, and we want to do something about that. And I'll be the first to say it's not for everyone. It's tough. I have triplet daughters, and two of my triplet daughters are social workers. I've got one that's working in child welfare, and she's investigating child abuse cases. And she called me this week saying, "I can't do this. This is too hard." And I was like, "Well, hang in there. Talk to your supervisor, whatever." You've got to. She has that passion, and you got to get past some of those difficulties. So I'll say it really isn't for everyone. And you talk about salary. It is a tougher position. When you're not making as good a money as some other professions, you could sell pharmaceuticals, or you could do something else to make some more money. But really, most of us go into this because we've got passion about something, and that sort of easy way to call it is we have a passion for social justice. I was, concerned about, various topics that pulled me into there, because I was seeing, couples struggling. I was seeing family issues that really were difficulty. I had a father that was sick, and so, those things sort of tap us and sort of steer us in that direction. So I would say for the vast majority, if you ask students why they pick this, they really have a passion to make a difference, and they recognize that maybe they can't change the whole system, though they'll try, but they might make a difference with you, with your family, and that's incredible. My other daughter, who's a school social worker, was really frustrated with her job, and then she gets this letter from a student saying, "You saved my life, and because of you, I'm alive today." And so she's like, "I love this. I'm going to keep going with this."
Let me put it this way: how often do you have students come to the Kent School of Social Work who are non-traditional students like you were, started off as a business person or a doctor or something else, and switched careers because they did feel that gnawing in their gut that they needed to do something that really made a difference?
I think social work probably has some image problems. People don't understand it. They don't even recognize it. At a younger age, people will identify, I might want to be a psychologist or something. That's the more common thing that people, so they'll go to college and major in psychology or some related field like that, but they may not pick social work. So it's only later that they'll discover, oh, there's this other field that actually, rather than psychology, and I'll do a broad biased statement about psychology, rather than studying rats or rather than studying brains in psychology, I want to really actually help those children or work in adoption or, make a difference with domestic violence, those kind of things. That hand-on work really is part of what social work is. So to answer your question, I don't think it's all that uncommon at all that people don't know early on they want to be a social worker, but they know they kind of have this passion or this desire to help, and then they kind of switch over later on. Some catch it earlier. I was a little older, but I've taught students that are 60 and 70 years old coming back to say, hey, first career's over. Now I really want to make a difference with a topic that was important to me all along.
As we get close to wrapping up here, what are your plans for the Kent School as far as strategic planning and growing the school? Because the Kent School is fairly small. How many students do you even have?
Well, we actually are one of the larger graduate programs at the university, but our undergrad is about 8 years old. So we have some room to grow with the undergraduate program. So that's one of the places we're going to grow. We can grow a little bit more with the graduate program. We've got about 500 graduate students, a little more than 500 graduate students, and about 180 undergrad students. So the university is going to be growing. We're going to be a part of that growth. We've got a strategic planning process that we're in the middle of. We just started, and we should try to wrap up over the summer, and that's going to really steer the kind of directions we're going to take, clean up some of the curriculum, make some changes, adjust to what's happening in the environment and the society, and will kind of keep us on the cutting edge with social work.
And what are some new programs perhaps that you're looking at or that you just implemented or getting about to implement? Anything on the horizon?
The substance abuse, a huge problem here.
Yes, it is.
And so we have that as a specialization, but we're adding it as an additional concentration at the undergraduate level because people, can get into that work with an undergraduate degree and kind of do that work and work on their master's. We've got some sort of what I'm calling graduation to employment combinations where they'll actually go in, major in social work, but take a job and do some internship stuff and kind of go back into that same field. Specifically for substance abuse, it's a huge, huge issue that we really don't have enough people to address the problems.
And once again, the master's program at the Kent School is rated in the top 10 by several different studies and in the top 20 in others. And so you got a really, really, really good master's program.
I think so. I think we can do nothing but push it forward. I'm excited to be here.
All right, David, appreciate you being on this program.
Thanks
a lot. That's David Jenkins, who is the Dean of the Kent School of Social Work at the University of Louisville. Well, we're recording this segment on Wednesday, April 19th, so by the time you hear this, the U.S. may have launched missiles at North Korea or vice versa. Jason Abbott is the director of the UofL Center for Asian Democracy and has been following all this drama with North Korea. He's here now to talk about it a little bit. Well, welcome back, Jason. We've had you on the program before. Welcome back.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
We talk about Asian democracy. North Korea is not an Asian democracy.
No.
Farthest from it, perhaps.
Absolutely. It's one of the last remaining socialist states left in the world, but even that isn't really a fair description because in many ways it functions like a monarchy. It's a dynasty. It's the Kim family that's run the country since the Second World War, and is an extremely brutal authoritarian state.
I want to talk some more about that in a minute. Right off the top, though, what do you make of all this saber rattling by North Korea and, frankly, by the United States and the Trump administration?
Well, it's not something that we haven't seen before with regards to North Korea. North Korea goes through these periods of saber rattling. We had a similar phase in the 1990s under the Clinton administration. In part, it's what it does to draw attention to itself and to try to get a better deal out of the international system. It has very little else with which it can negotiate, and it uses its program and its missile program to that effect. So we shouldn't be surprised by saber rattling by the North Koreans. Perhaps the response from the U.S. this time is something that's caught a few of us more by surprise.
When we see the video from North Korea, which is a very tough country for journalists to cover, they can't hardly get in, and when they do, they're restricted by the government media, government censors. When we see the video, though, you see all these soldiers marching in lockstep down the street for these big celebrations, and the missiles traveling down the street. You kind of mentioned it, but what are they trying to show? What is the supreme leader trying to show the rest of the world, in your view?
In part, there's a defiance that against all of the opposition of the international community, against the sanctions, against 70 years of division of the country, that they're still there, that the Soviet Union may have gone, other socialist regimes may have gone, but they've survived. And in part, that defiance is where the regime draws some of its legitimacy from. Of course, the people are subjected to an incredible amount of propaganda, but part of that propaganda is that the regime faces an existential threat from the United States and its allies. And so parading its military like that is its way of snubbing the international regime and also playing up to that mythology that it uses to legitimize itself.
So is that the card that he has to keep playing to keep his own people perhaps in line and behind him, that we're facing this threat from big bad United States, and so we all got to band together and be North Korea, the little tough country?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly, that's what it appears to be. As you said earlier in one of your comments, this isn't a country that we can get free access of information from. It's very difficult to get in. So we don't really know what most North Koreans actually believe. We know from a United Nations report released a couple of years ago that people are subjected to propaganda from nursery school age onwards about the regime, about the leadership. So, it's hard to know just how much of this is real and how much of this is propaganda, but certainly there are a few other cards that the regime has. It doesn't have an extensive economic legitimacy it can draw on from decades of growth like its neighbor to the south. So instead, it's reminding its people that the threat still exists. The threat that brought it to power is still out there, and that the U.S. still wants it wants to overthrow it.
We're talking again with Jason Abbott, who's the director of the UofL Center for Asian Democracy. Do you think, I'm going to ask you to be a predictor here, and this show's not going to air. We're doing this interview about a week before the show is going to air. Do you think anything will happen, or will this just be another thing where the U.S. is threatening and North Korea is threatening, and they both back down, and life goes on?
So previous incidents would suggest that it will all calm down at some point, that sober minds and sober heads will reflect on it and step back from confrontation. The problem is that a miscalculation could always result in an escalation of tensions, and that's what everybody fears. And that's always going to be more likely when there's a new administration in power, whether that's a new administration in Washington or 3 or 4 years ago when Kim Jong-il became leader, a new administration in Pyongyang. And so I think that's where the risk is, that an inexperienced president with a relatively inexperienced cabinet might misread the situation, and then before we know it, things escalate. But if we look at past incidences of the saber rattling that's occurred in the past, we have seen both sides step back and some kind of settlement arrived at, even if we are not always fully appraised of what the details of that are.
From your perspective, is Kim Jong-un nuts?
Is he nuts?
Or Or is that just propaganda from the United States?
Well, actually, it's propaganda as well from South Korea. The South Koreans like to portray the regime to the north as being unstable. There's certainly a sense that the leaders of these countries behave, in ways that monarchs in the 15th and 16th century in Europe did. They will tolerate no dissent, and they will execute people who disagree with them. And that's something that we don't do anymore in the West. So is it insane? Well, it's certainly beyond the realms of what we consider normal behavior. But the people that he's executed are the people he felt were the closest threats, the most likely threats to his hold on power. So there's a rational explanation for why he did it. We might not agree with the measures or the mechanisms by which they were conducted.
Is there any underlying dissent that you're aware of in North Korea? You just mentioned what happens to dissenters, but is there... Every country that has a totalitarian government has some dissenters. The Soviet Union for years and years had dissenters. China has dissenters. How do you view North Korea? Is it such a closed-off society that there really aren't even any dissenters raising their voices?
There are little, if any, dissenters raising their voices within the country. What we do have are people who have escaped North Korea over the last 2 decades. And these number, anywhere from several hundred to several thousand. And many of these have become vocal critics of the regime on the international scene. They've come to the United States, or they've gone to Europe, or they're in South Korea, and their testimony has been very important in showing the nature of the regime and the humanitarian abuses that it has conducted. So these people suggest that there may be a broader knowledge of the world than we think, but there's little evidence that there's any domestic dissent movement.
And how much media is getting in or out of Korea, the North Korea?
Well, every home that has a television set has a modified television set so that people can only receive state channels. Satellite.
Well, thank God that's not the case here in the United States.
Satellite broadcasts are banned, and the internet is very strictly controlled. On the border, though, on the border with South Korea and on the border with China, it's likely that, stuff gets through, just the nature of the way in which, broadcasts work and the way in which the internet and signals work. But it has a very effective propaganda machine. And so, there's a little equivalent of millions of Chinese accessing the internet and going to their version of Twitter, etc. We don't have anything like that.
I saw a story, I think it was on CBS News, where there was a CBS News reporter in North Korea reporting on all this stuff going on in the military buildup on both sides. And the government had taken the outside reporters on an excursion, a government-led excursion through, it was like a flower shop and an open-air market that, was just lovely flowers and lots of food and all this kind of stuff, showing them all the good stuff. And so then he stopped and asked their tour guide, who was a lovely young lady, said, "Hey, did you hear about the missile test that failed?" And she said, "No, I hadn't heard about it, and I don't believe you that failed." Is that was obviously something she had to say, but do you think that the North Koreans are getting any of that sort of information at all from any source, anywhere, that they even have any idea what's going on with the United States, other than the United States is threatening us?
No, I mean, one of the things that we've known, we know from monitoring of the state media there by the South Koreans in particular, is that when there have been failures before, when there have been failed missile tests or failed atomic tests, they have either not reported the failure or they've simply said it was a wonderful success. It's almost Orwellian in that sense. So there's no... there's no sort of widespread acceptance that this is there'd be any attempt at balance of the overall situation.
Again, we're talking with Jason Abbott, who's the director of the UofL Center for Asian Democracy, and he's a political science professor as well at the University of Louisville. Well, let's talk about what may be the biggest issue of all here from the United States perspective, is the role of China. What is the role of China in playing perhaps peacekeeper and moderator in this battle between the United States and North Korea?
China likes to portray the image that it has this role. How much it can influence North Korea is a very uncertain. There's a very uncertain answer to that. We simply don't know how much leverage they have. We know, for example, a few things. We know that they give about $5 billion in aid each year to the North Koreans. Of course, that's leverage. They could threaten to reduce that. They could threaten to stop that. North Korea trades with few, if any, countries in the world, so it's no surprise that its largest trading partner is China. Again, that's about $5 to $6 billion worth of trade a year. And so there are levers that the Chinese can use to bring pressure on the regime. To what extent it would be able to affect significant change in policy direction? For example, would the Chinese be able to get them to stop the nuclear program? It's hard to say. When we saw a similar period in the 1990s, what we got eventually was a complicated food, oil aid program involving China, the United States, and South Korea, a sort of multilateral deal. Something like that is probably what's most likely to get out of it. But from the Chinese point of view, they like to talk up their role because A, it makes them a significant player in the region so that everyone has to call Beijing when there's a crisis. But secondly, because the regime is actually useful to Beijing. The Chinese would much rather have an ally between South Korea, which has United States troops stationed in it, and themselves. The last thing they want is instability. The last thing they want is a united Korea that's pro-American right up against their border, or a destabilized Korea where tens of thousands of refugees are crossing into China. So for China, the status quo is kind of like the dirty secret that everyone knows. The Chinese and pretty much everyone else would kind of like the status quo to stay in place.
To keep everybody happy.
Keeps everybody happy.
So there's little chance of any time in the near future North Korea somehow becoming a totally destabilized country where you might have democratic elections and anything crazy like that. That's not going to happen anytime soon.
I think it's very unlikely. I think a more likely scenario would be that any change in the regime is going to come from above, and that's going to require a change in leadership. Both of those are highly unlikely at this juncture, but they're far more likely than the prospect of a democratic North Korea in anything but the distant future.
All right. Well, Jason Abbott, always appreciate you being on the show. You're always got a lot of information about the Asian region, and we appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. We're going to wrap up the show now. With always, we have a Did You Know segment at the end of the program, a little bit of trivia, a little something about the University of Louisville. So this Did You Know segment. U of L's Ladybirds dance team was named national champions in the overall Division 1A Team Performance Division last week at the NCAA National Championships in Florida. The team also won the Division 1A hip-hop competition, earning the Ladybirds their first double title in school history. In total, U of L's Spirit program won 5 national titles, the most ever for any school in a single year. Once again, you can hear UofL Today with Mark Hebert every Monday and now on Wednesday night at 6 on 93.9 The Ville. You can also watch the programs on Metro TV, which is Louisville's government access channel, and KET3 during the week. I'll see you Monday mornings at 9:30 on WHAS TV's Great Day Live with a news story about research, students, or something cool going on at the University of Louisville. Thanks again for listening, and go Cards!